The Battle of Stalingrad witnessed one of the most devastating counteroffensives in military history when Marshal Georgy Zhukov orchestrated Operation Uranus, trapping and annihilating hundreds of thousands of German troops in a mere 72-hour period. This is the story of how strategic brilliance and calculated fury turned the tide of World War II. August 1942. The German Wehrmacht stands at the gates of Stalingrad, confident in their inevitable victory. Hitler has declared this city will fall, and with it, the Soviet Union will crumble. General Friedrich Paulus commands the Sixth Army, over 300,000 of Germany's finest soldiers, supported by tanks, artillery, and the Luftwaffe. They have crushed Poland, France, and most of Europe. Stalingrad should be just another conquest. But 800 miles away in Moscow, a man sits hunched over maps spread across a massive oak table. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, Stalin's most trusted general, studies every road, every river, every hill around Stalingrad. His eyes burn with cold calculation. The Germans think they're hunting prey, but Zhukov is about to turn the hunters into the hunted. September bleeds into October. House-to-house fighting rages through Stalingrad's ruins. Soviet defenders cling to every building, every room, every staircase. German soldiers advance meter by bloody meter, but something feels wrong. They're winning battles but losing time. Winter approaches, and still the city hasn't fallen. General Paulus reports to Berlin that Stalingrad will fall within days. His men control 90% of the city. Victory seems assured. But in the frozen rubble, Soviet soldiers whisper a different story. They speak of massive troop movements in the darkness, of tanks rolling north under cover of night, of artillery pieces being positioned in forests beyond German reconnaissance. Zhukov's plan takes shape like a masterpiece of destruction. While the Germans fixate on capturing the last districts of Stalingrad, he masses over 1 million Soviet soldiers in two massive army groups north and south of the city. The Romanian and Italian armies protecting the German flanks have no idea what's coming. They're about to face the full fury of the Red Army's most devastating offensive, November 19th, 1942. 4:30 a.m. The temperature drops to minus 20 degrees Celsius. German sentries stamp their feet against the cold, breath-forming clouds in the bitter air. Romanian soldiers huddle in inadequate winter gear, cursing their German allies who promised this war would end before winter. Then the earth explodes. Over 3,500 Soviet artillery pieces unleash hell simultaneously. The bombardment is so intense that German soldiers 40 kilometers away feel the ground shake beneath their feet. Romanian positions simply vanish under the crushing weight of high explosives. In 80 minutes, Zhukov's artillery fires more shells than the entire British army used in the Battle of the Somme. Through the smoke and fire, Soviet T-34 tanks emerge like mechanical demons. Their engines roar through the morning darkness as they smash through Romanian defensive lines that crumble like paper. Behind the tanks, waves of Soviet infantry advance with fixed bayonets, their battle cries echoing across the frozen steppe. The Romanian Third Army disintegrates in hours. Panic spreads through their ranks as Soviet forces punch through their lines and race toward the rear areas. Romanian generals frantically radio for German reinforcements, but Zhukov has planned for this. Every German reserve in the region is already committed to the street fighting in Stalingrad itself. General Paulus receives the first reports with disbelief. Impossible. The Romanians must be exaggerating. A local Soviet attack, nothing more. He continues planning the final assault on Stalingrad's last defenders, completely unaware that his entire army is about to be trapped in history's greatest military encirclement. November 20th. The southern arm of Zhukov's trap springs shut. The Soviet 51st and 57th Armies smash through the Romanian 4th Army with devastating effectiveness. Tank crews report advancing so fast they outrun their own infantry support. Romanian soldiers throw down their weapons and flee westward in complete disorder. Soviet tank commanders receive orders that make them smile grimly. Race for the town of Kalak, 60 kilometers behind German lines. Capture the Don River Bridge intact. Complete the encirclement. The tank crews understand. They're not just advancing. They're sealing the fate of the entire German 6th Army. Lieutenant Colonel Filipov leads the 26th Tank Corps in a desperate race against time. His T-34s thunder across the frozen steppe, crushing everything in their path. German supply convoys scatter before them like leaves in a hurricane. Radio intercepts reveal growing panic in German headquarters as reports flood in of Soviet tanks appearing everywhere behind their lines. In Stalingrad itself, German soldiers hear the distant rumble of artillery growing closer from two directions. Veteran sergeants exchange worried glances. They recognize the sound. It's not defensive fire. It's an offensive bombardment, and it's coming from behind them. General Paulus finally grasps the magnitude of the disaster unfolding around his army. Soviet forces have broken through on both flanks and are racing to link up west of Stalingrad. If they succeed, over 300,000 German and Axis soldiers will be trapped with no escape route. He orders immediate withdrawal from Stalingrad to break out before the trap closes. But Hitler's response arrives within hours. Stand fast. Hold Stalingrad at all costs. The Luftwaffe will supply the army by air until a relief force breaks through. Retreat is forbidden. Paulus stares at the radio message in horror. Hitler has just sentenced his entire army to death, November 22nd, 6 p.m. Forward elements of Lieutenant Colonel Filipov's Tank Corps reach the outskirts of Kalak. Through their periscopes, tank commanders see the vital bridge over the Don River still intact, lightly defended by unsuspecting German troops. The moment has arrived to seal the trap. Soviet tanks approach the bridge, flying German flags captured from destroyed positions. In the growing darkness, German sentries mistake them for friendly reinforcements. By the time they realize their error, T-34s are already thundering across the bridge, machine guns chattering. The bridge falls in minutes. Soviet infantry pour across the Don and establish defensive positions. Radio operators transmit the code word that changes history. Encirclement complete. The German 6th Army is trapped. Over 300,000 soldiers find themselves cut off in a pocket measuring roughly 50 by 30 kilometers. They have supplies for perhaps a week. Winter is closing in, with temperatures dropping to minus 30 degrees. The nearest German forces are over 100 kilometers away, facing their own Soviet offensives. Hermann Göring promises Hitler that the Luftwaffe can airlift 500 tons of supplies daily to the trapped army. Experienced pilots laugh bitterly at this fantasy. The required airfields are under constant Soviet attack. Winter weather grounds planes for days at a time. Even in perfect conditions, the transport fleet lacks the capacity for such an operation. Inside the pocket, German soldiers begin to understand their situation. They're not just cut off. They're sentenced to slow death by starvation and cold. Ammunition runs low. Medical supplies disappear. Horses are slaughtered for food, then dogs, then rats. Zhukov allows no respite. Soviet artillery pounds German positions constantly. Katyusha rocket launchers scream overhead, delivering explosive death from the sky. Every German movement draws immediate fire. Supply dumps burn. Command posts disappear under shell fire. The Luftwaffe manages to deliver perhaps 100 tons of supplies on good days, 1/5 of the minimum requirement. Transport planes crash in blizzards or explode under Soviet fighter attacks. Pilots report flying through walls of anti-aircraft fire so thick it seems solid. Many never return. Inside Stalingrad's ruins, German soldiers who once seemed unstoppable now huddle in bombed-out buildings, burning furniture for warmth. Their uniforms, designed for rapid summer campaigns, provide no protection against Russian winter. Frostbite claims more casualties than Soviet bullets. December arrives with temperatures plunging to minus 40 degrees. German soldiers wrap their feet in newspaper and rags. Weapons jam in the cold. Vehicles refuse to start. The dead freeze solid before they can be buried, creating grotesque ice sculptures throughout the pocket. General Paulus pleads with Hitler for permission to break out while his army still has strength to fight. The response is always the same. Hold your positions. A relief force is coming. The Luftwaffe will increase supply flights. Victory is still possible. Field Marshal von Manstein launches Operation Winter Storm, a desperate attempt to break through to the trapped Sixth Army. Panzer divisions advance through howling blizzards, fighting savage battles against Soviet defenders who seem to appear from nowhere, fight with suicidal intensity, then vanish like ghosts. For a few days, hope flickers in the Stalingrad pocket. Radio intercepts speak of German tanks only 50 kilometers away. Some officers suggest breaking out to meet the relief force. But Hitler's orders remain unchanged. Hold Stalingrad. The relief force will come to you. The relief attempt fails. Soviet reserves pour in faster than German forces can advance. Manstein's panzers, the Wehrmacht's elite, are ground down in a series of brutal engagements. They retreat, leaving the Sixth Army to its fate. January 1943. The end approaches with mathematical certainty. German soldiers are dying at a rate of 5,000 per day from starvation, disease and cold, even without battle casualties. Horses have been eaten. Rats are delicacies. Some units resort to cannibalism. Medical facilities collapse under the weight of casualties. Doctors perform amputations without anesthesia. Typhus spreads through the ranks. Men lie down in the snow and simply never get up again. The living lack strength to bury the dead. Soviet propaganda loudspeakers boom across no man's land in perfect German. Every 7 seconds, a German soldier dies in Russia. Stalingrad is their mass grave. The sound of a ticking clock follows, then a gunshot, then the announcement repeats. German soldiers count the seconds and go mad. Zhukov prepares the final offensive to eliminate the pocket. Operation Ring will employ overwhelming artillery bombardment, followed by coordinated attacks from multiple directions. The trapped Germans will be crushed systematically, sector by sector, until none remain. January 10th, 1943. The Soviet ultimatum arrives at Paulus's headquarters. Surrender now, and your men will be treated according to international law. Continue fighting and face total annihilation. Paulus forwards the ultimatum to Hitler. The response arrives within hours. Fight to the last man and bullet. The final Soviet offensive begins with an artillery barrage that makes previous bombardments seem gentle. Over 7,000 guns fire continuously for 55 minutes. German positions disappear under avalanches of high explosives. Entire battalions are erased from existence. Soviet infantry and tanks advance behind a creeping barrage that moves forward at exactly 100 meters every 4 minutes. German resistance, already weakened by months of starvation and cold, crumbles. Whole regiments surrender without firing a shot. Others fight with desperate fury until overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The pocket shrinks day by day. Soviet forces capture airfields, cutting off the last trickle of supplies. German wounded lie in the snow without medical care. Officers shoot themselves rather than face capture. Discipline collapses as starving soldiers fight over scraps of food. January 31st, 1943. Marshal Zhukov's masterpiece reaches its conclusion. General Paulus, newly promoted to Field Marshal by Hitler with the implicit expectation that he commits suicide rather than surrender, instead walks out of his bunker with a white flag. The man who led 300,000 soldiers into Stalingrad surrenders with the 91,000 survivors of his once mighty army. Hitler rages in his bunker. How could Paulus surrender? No German field marshal has ever been captured alive. The disgrace is unbearable. But the mathematics of Zhukov's trap prove inexorable. Of the 300,000 Axis soldiers who entered the Stalingrad pocket, fewer than 6,000 would ever see their homeland again. The victory sends shockwaves through the German war machine. The myth of Wehrmacht invincibility lies shattered in the ruins of Stalingrad. Elite divisions that took years to train and equip are gone forever. Germany's strategic reserves are depleted. The initiative passes permanently to the Red Army. Soviet casualties were equally staggering, over 1 million killed and wounded, but the Soviet Union could replace its losses. Germany could not. Every veteran sergeant, every experienced pilot, every skilled tank commander lost at Stalingrad was irreplaceable. The Wehrmacht would never recover from this catastrophic defeat. Zhukov's triumph extended far beyond tactical victory. He had demonstrated that Soviet forces could not only defend, but conduct complex offensive operations, requiring precise coordination between multiple army groups. The Red Army that emerged from Stalingrad was fundamentally different from the force that nearly collapsed in 1941. The strategic implications rippled across the globe. German allies began seeking separate peace negotiations. Neutral nations reassessed their positions. The Western allies, seeing clear evidence of Soviet military capability, accelerated planning for the Second Front. The entire balance of World War II had shifted. In Berlin, German high command studies maps with growing desperation. How do you replace 300,000 elite soldiers? How do you defend against an enemy who can orchestrate such devastating offensives? How do you maintain morale when your most successful general has surrendered an entire army? The answers prove elusive. Germany's strategic position deteriorates rapidly as Soviet offensives cascade westward. Army Group Don disintegrates. The Caucasus becomes untenable. Ukraine faces reconquest. The dream of Lebensraum transforms into a nightmare of inexorable retreat. For Zhukov, Stalingrad represents vindication of his strategic vision. He had recognized that the German army, despite its tactical excellence, was fatally overextended. By allowing them to commit their reserves to urban warfare while secretly massing overwhelming force on the flanks. He had created the perfect trap. The operation's success lay not in any single brilliant stroke, but in methodical preparation and flawless execution. Intelligence networks mapped every German position. Artillery surveys calculated precise firing coordinates. Tank crews trained for weeks on the exact routes they would follow. Nothing was left to chance. Soviet soldiers who survived Stalingrad carried themselves differently afterward. They had faced the Wehrmacht at its peak and emerged victorious. The psychological transformation was as important as the tactical victory. The Red Army that began the long march to Berlin was confidence incarnate. Soviet tanks approached the bridge, flying German flags captured from destroyed positions. In the growing darkness, German sentries mistake them for friendly reinforcements. By the time they realize their error, T-34s are already thundering across the bridge, machine guns chattering. The bridge falls in minutes. Soviet infantry pour across the Don and establish defensive positions. Radio operators transmit the code word that changes history: encirclement complete. The German Sixth Army is trapped. German prisoners marching into captivity represented more than military defeat. They symbolized the collapse of Nazi racial ideology. The supposedly inferior Slavs had outfought, outmaneuvered, and outproduced the master race. The lie at the heart of Nazism stood exposed. International observers struggled to comprehend the magnitude of Stalingrad's impact. Churchill called it the turning point of the war. Roosevelt authorized massive increases in Lend-Lease aid to the Soviet Union. Stalin, for perhaps the first time since 1941, allowed himself to believe in ultimate victory, but the cost haunted everyone involved. Stalingrad's ruins contained the bodies of over 1 million soldiers from both sides. Entire city blocks had been reduced to radioactive rubble. The Volga ran red with blood for months. Victory came at a price that staggered even hardened veterans. Soviet war correspondents described scenes that defied imagination. German soldiers so weak from starvation they could barely hold their weapons. Frozen corpses stacked like cordwood. Hospital bunkers where wounded men died for lack of basic medical supplies. The price of Hitler's obstinacy was measured in human suffering. The German people learned of the disaster gradually through whispered rumors and conspicuous absences. Official propaganda spoke of strategic withdrawals and regrouping, but families noticed that letters from the Eastern Front simply stopped arriving. The truth, when it finally emerged, shattered civilian morale. Zhukov's victory established him as the Soviet Union's preeminent military leader. Stalin, typically jealous of subordinate success, instead promoted him and entrusted him with planning future offensives. The marshal who had saved Moscow and conquered Stalingrad would ultimately capture Berlin itself. The tactical lessons of Stalingrad influenced military doctrine for generations. The value of strategic deception, the importance of maintaining operational reserves, the effectiveness of coordinated multi-front operations all became standard elements of modern warfare. Military academies still study Zhukov's masterpiece. For Germany, Stalingrad marked the beginning of the end. The army that had conquered most of Europe was broken beyond repair. Fresh divisions rushed to the Eastern Front were filled with teenagers and old men. Equipment shortages became chronic. The Luftwaffe never recovered from the transport losses. The psychological impact on Hitler was equally devastating. The Führer, who had promised his people victory, now faced the prospect of defeat. His strategic decision-making, never systematic, became increasingly erratic. The intuitive genius he claimed was revealed as murderous incompetence. Soviet industry, relocated beyond German reach during the dark days of 1941, now reached full production capacity. Tanks, aircraft and artillery poured from factories faster than the Wehrmacht could destroy them. The material balance shifted decisively in favor of the Red Army. As news of Stalingrad spread through occupied Europe, resistance movements took heart. French partisans increased their sabotage operations. Yugoslav guerrillas expanded their territory. Polish underground fighters prepared for eventual uprising. The myth of German invincibility was dead. The battle's aftermath revealed the true nature of Nazi warfare. Soviet forces discovered evidence of systematic atrocities against civilians and prisoners of war. Mass graves, execution sites, and starvation camps documented the ideology behind German military operations. Liberation meant revelation of unprecedented horrors. Zhukov's triumph at Stalingrad demonstrated that superior technology and training could be overcome by superior strategy and determination. The Red Army had learned to match German tactical excellence while maintaining overwhelming strategic advantage. The student had surpassed the teacher. American and British observers, initially skeptical of Soviet military capability, revised their assessments dramatically. The alliance that would ultimately defeat Nazi Germany required recognition of the Red Army as an equal partner. Stalingrad made that recognition unavoidable. The German generals who survived Stalingrad spent the remainder of the war looking over their shoulders, waiting for the next Soviet offensive. The initiative belonged permanently to the Red Army. German strategy devolved into desperate attempts to delay the inevitable. Stalin's gratitude to Zhukov was genuine, but temporary. The marshal who had saved the Soviet Union would later face disgrace during Stalin's post-war paranoia. But nothing could diminish his achievement at Stalingrad, the strategic masterpiece that changed the course of human history, the 72 hours that sealed the fate of the German Sixth Army, represented the culmination of months of careful planning and preparation. Zhukov had created the perfect trap and executed it with precision that left no possibility of escape. The hunters had become the hunted, and the price of that reversal was measured in hundreds of thousands of lives. In the ruins of Stalingrad, the future was written in blood and fire. The Wehrmacht's aura of invincibility lay shattered among the rubble. The Red Army emerged as a force capable of defeating any enemy, and Marshal Georgy Zhukov stood revealed as one of history's greatest military commanders, the architect of victory in humanity's darkest hour. Soviet tanks approached the bridge, flying German flags captured from destroyed positions. In the growing darkness, German sentries mistake them for friendly reinforcements. By the time they realize their error, T-34s are already thundering across the bridge, machine guns chattering. The bridge falls in minutes. Soviet infantry pour across the Don and establish defensive positions. Radio operators transmit the code word that changes history: encirclement complete. The German Sixth Army is trapped.